Hey friends, it's Mike in Denver. As I've said before, I'm trying to make more of these videos this year, breaking down local news stories. The one I'm covering today is about Representative Lamborn, who is congressman out of Colorado Springs, and he's the subject of a congressional ethics investigation. Now, how did this come up? Basically, one of his staffers was fired and filed a lawsuit saying he was wrongfully terminated. And then the ethics committee took up some of his accusations, interviewed a bunch of staffers, and last week they published this whole report where you can read pages and pages of his staffers talking about what it's like to work in his office. And, I think it's an interesting story because you get an idea of what it's like to work in this environment. It's not really political, right? Because obviously all the people who work for this guy agree with his policies for the most part. That's why they work with him, right? So they're all conservative, Christian, Republicans down there in Colorado Springs. I don't really agree with the guy's politics, but for all I know, he's a great boss, or maybe he's a bad boss. And that's what I dove into these depositions to kind of find out. So I read a bunch of pages like this one. This is the interview with him. And they interviewed, I guess, they published interviews with 4 other staffers in his office, a couple of whom were very much trying to protect him. You could tell at times, they didn't remember a lot of things. One of whom was kind of caught in the middle, who's saying like, hey, I like working here, it's all good. But then they'd kind of pin her down. The lawyers would be like, well, you said that you only had to do these things like a couple times a year, but we see in these daily reports that you did them 3 times this month. So, and she'd be like, okay, well, maybe that month was rare. I guess I did them a little more than I thought, but I'm really okay with it. It's not a big deal. So, it's just an interesting view inside the world of what it's like to work in these offices. And I got to be honest, it reminds me a lot of the show Veep. If you've ever seen that, love that show. And I feel like it kind of shows the personalities going on in there. So let me just jump into a little bit of it. I'm going to try to break it down kind of quickly, not take too long. Some of the accusations that he's facing that came out of this, one is this dude would accept gifts from his staffers. Now, it seems like these gifts were organized by his chief of staff, but that doesn't make it much better. If you worked at a company and the COO was going around to everyone in the office and saying, hey, we're going to give the CEO a Christmas present, everybody throw in $20. There'd be a part of you isn't this dude running the company? Why do I have to throw in money here? And it's definitely worse when you work for the taxpayers, So that's one right off the bat. Here's a quote from one of the managers of his offices in Colorado Springs. This guy really doesn't care anymore. He's kind of over the line. He's just kind of spilling it all out there. And he kind of says, I'm already a political leper in Colorado Springs. Everybody knows I worked for this guy. I quit. Now this other guy who he was in charge of filed a lawsuit, and he's a witness. So he's kind of like, I'll tell you everything because it's already over for me. But here's a quote from him. He said, the gifts would be for Mrs. Lamborn and the congressman, and we had to make sure, I would tell the chief of staff what we were getting to make sure it was his approval, and also the dollar amount was high enough and that the congressman and Mrs. Lamborn would be okay with it. Now, the only defense I can make for the congressman there is maybe he's like, I didn't know this was going on. It was all my chief of staff. The chief of staff has worked there for 15 years. So at some point, the congressman needs to know what's going on. And also, if you're a congressman and you got a bunch of people working for you, making government salaries, which aren't that high, and they come to you at Christmas and give you, tickets to a theater is one of the things apparently that he got, wouldn't you be like, oh, wait, who's organizing this? This is highly just not cool. Number one, you guys don't need to buy me things. It's all good. You guys work for me. Thank you. You'd think that's what he would say, but no, apparently for years and years, he's just been letting his office organize and give gifts to him. Seems pretty uncool. Another thing, also there's some signs in the depositions that the guy who's filing the lawsuit, he was not on board. He was like, this is BS. One of the other witnesses said I told him he didn't have to do it. It's yeah, but if you work in the office, you kind of have to do it. You don't want to be the guy who doesn't pitch in on the boss's gift. And that's why ethics rules exist, because this whole you don't have to, but you kind of have to, that's the kind of gray area that ethics rules are there to stop. The other thing that came up is, another blurring the lines thing, is that Congressman Lamborn's wife was just way too involved in his office. She had an official email address. She was getting daily updates of what happened in the office, what everybody's job was and what they did. But she doesn't work there. That's inappropriate. If you had a boss who was the CEO of your company and every day you sent him an update of what you did, that would be normal. If you were CCing his wife, you'd be like, what's going on here and why? And if that's not cool in a private company, why would that be cool in a congressional office? It makes no sense. There was also a ton about like personal favors. She'd call people up, they'd leave the office at 9 o'clock. Apparently, like the unofficial word was, oh, just say that you're on your lunch break because then you can go do it. But they leave at like 9:30 and come back at 2 o'clock. They'd be helping her move furniture. They'd be helping her with a second part of this is that she was the campaign manager. So she'd call people up sometimes to help her move furniture in the house and sometimes to be like, oh, can you help me with this campaign related task? Well, you're not supposed to be doing that when you're getting paid by the taxpayer. There's supposed to be like a pretty clear line between do you work for the people or do you work for politics? And they seem to be blurring that line all over the place. Let's see, skipping through a few more things here, as I don't want to take too long. At one point, one of the witnesses says, I always picked up the congressman from the airport. Then you go over to the congressman's interview and the lawyer says, so have you ever been picked up at the airport by a staffer? And he says, oh, on occasion when my car was in the shop. It's like, come on, man. Like, we can kind of see through this. Clearly, the lines are being blurred there. And again, like, come on, you can't call an Uber. Like, what year is this? So we'll skip through some more of this stuff that I got way too into and spent way too long. All right, now we jump into some of the favors for his family. So there was this example that his daughter-in-law had a naturalization celebration. So, she became a citizen. That's nice, but it happened at the office. That's weird. And then when they try to ask the congressman about it in his deposition, he says, oh, I don't remember if I even attended, but it wasn't our idea to have the party. Our staffers came up with that. Well, they went and asked the boss of his office, and in his sworn deposition, he says, that definitely was not our idea. The Lamborns told us that we were going to have a celebration for their daughter-in-law. So then, the congressman's saying, wasn't our idea, and I don't even remember if I was there. Seems like he would remember if he was there, if his daughter-in-law is having a celebration. And they're like, all right, well, was your wife there? And then he like kind of throws around. He's like, well, she probably was there if my daughter-in-law was there. It's like, yeah, no, of course she was. And you obviously probably were too, allegedly. I don't want to get sued or anything. So, why are you throwing parties in your office that your staff pretty much has to attend for your daughter-in-law? Just do it at the house, dude. Like, well, why? Clearly he thinks it's cool. You're a citizen, come to my congressional office. Not cool, man. They also had this situation where his son, who's a graphic designer, was trying to find a job with the federal government. Sounds cush. Your dad's a congressman. Sounds nice. So, they're reaching out. The staffers are like putting together lists of jobs that he can apply for. They're kind of trying to say, oh, well, we would do that for any constituent. We had a packet ready to send to constituents, and that's probably all we did. Yeah, if the packet was like, here's the link to where the jobs are, here's a blog post about how to apply, maybe that would be cool. But of course, the lawyers, the ethics office, they have the receipts. They have emails from staffers to the son of the congressman with links to all these different jobs that basically they were looking through the career website and finding graphic designer jobs and sending them to the son. Clearly, not something you should be doing during work hours, and also just like uncool. Again, imagine if your own boss was like, hey, do you mind sending my son, some of these, a bunch of jobs? Can you find some jobs for my son? It's just weird. And I know it sounds like, oh, I'm sure they all do this, and hopefully they don't. But in this case, they're getting caught because this has all been alleged in this lawsuit. There's also an email in here where the son emails one of the staffers, says, hey, I have an interview next week with this, there's like FBI jobs to be graphic designers. Who knew? CIA jobs, crazy. So he's like, do you have any ideas of what kind of questions they're going to ask? The staffer's like, oh, hey, I'm, in the mountains on vacation, but here's some ideas of what you can prepare. It's just inappropriate. That's not what you need to be doing for your boss's son. It's just weird. Then we get to actually, I'm going to save this part because it's just too good. I'm going to save it for the end. There's also some COVID stuff in there. Basically, this congressman, I'm trying not to get into the politics of it, but he's a conservative Christian Republican from Colorado Springs. They say in here that, his employees, who probably agree with him largely culturally about, the general state of the country, but they're like, yeah, this guy's telling us that like COVID's not real. It was made up to sabotage Trump. And one of the staffers in the office is a smoker, she's overweight, and she's like a little extra worried. And her husband like battles Lyme disease, he's autoimmune, deficient, or immunodeficient, whatever. And so she's like always with a mask on. She's like getting bullied by the chief of staff. This poor lady's like in here defending the congressman. Oh, it was fine to work there. I don't know why this guy had a problem with me wearing a mask. It was just like uncomfortable stuff. And if it's in a private company, maybe you can quit, whatever. But this is even worse when you're like in a congressional building. At one point, they say the guy who was the boss of the Colorado Springs office says, I used to get a call from the Capitol Police every week just checking in on me because they're responsible for the safety of like congressional staffers. And they were like, dude, are you guys still open? Throughout all of 2020, I'm not talking 2021, 2020, these guys never went home. They had their office wide open, 100% staffed the entire pandemic because this congressman, didn't believe it, said that masks didn't work, whatever. I'm not trying to go into that. I'm just like, the police would call up and the Capitol Police would be like, are you guys still okay over there? You're the only office that's open. We don't know of any other office in the entire country that's still staffed. And the guy who was in charge of that office would be like, well, that's what the congressman wants. So yeah, we're still staying open. So, the guy who filed the lawsuit is claiming that he would raise concerns about COVID. He would be mocked, he would be yelled at, they'd cancel his vacations. Basically, that's his whole allegation, is that he did great work, but he was fired because, he wanted to take COVID seriously and he didn't want to go move the Mrs. Lamborn's furniture, and he didn't want to, whatever, pick them up from the airport and stuff like that. That's kind of the gist of the lawsuit. So the whole COVID thing, it's just like embarrassing for them. And it's like, this poor woman works in your office. She's legitimately susceptible to COVID. She's older, she smokes, she's overweight. Like, I mean, this is one of the other witnesses saying it. He's like, I'm not trying to be mean, but like, she really was at risk, and she's getting mocked by the chief of staff, being, telling her that, she's crazy, basically. So that's some of the stuff going on with the COVID stuff. But we got to circle back to the family, because there's just this one last piece that's just too crazy to not include. And I feel like it's making a lot of the headlines. So at one point in time, this son, who they'd already helped find a job, he was living in New York, apparently. So that also, well, we won't, it's also like, they were like, oh, we do this for any constituent. It's like, but he lives in New York, so he's actually not a constituent. So why were you, helping him get a job? Anyway, beside the point, he's moving to DC to try to get this government job. And apparently he had some layover where he was in DC, I guess, interviewing for jobs, and he didn't yet have an apartment. So according to the congressman, he would stay with him in his office. That's where they slept, right? So that's not actually that uncommon in DC. It's a whole thing. Congress people are like, I'm saving taxpayer money, and I'm like, just like you, I don't have like two homes. I sleep in my office in DC. And it kind of makes sense because they're not there full time. And why would you rent a place full time? And I think a lot of it, truthfully, is probably not true. Like, they probably say they sleep at their office, but they really like stay at hotels because they got like plenty of money mostly. But at least according to them, they stay at their office. That's not a Republican or Democrat thing. A lot of Congress people claim that. Probably some of them actually do it. I don't know. So this congressman says, I stay in my office, and my son came down to DC for a couple weeks. He doesn't remember how long it was, of course. He doesn't remember most things in this deposition, but apparently he stayed with me in the office, is what he claims. Well, the rumors that were going around the staff, that's verified by multiple staffers, just rumors, no one can say for sure they saw it, but the rumor is that the son was staying in a storage unit in the basement of the Capitol. So each congressman gets like a 12 by 12 room in the basement of the Capitol for like extra tables and filing cabinets and whatever. And apparently this congressman told his son, hey, why don't you just, crash out on the floor of this storage unit in the basement of the Capitol? Super weird. And like, I mean, like, I can kind of respect the hustle, but at the same time, like, that's kind of the people's house. And it's one thing for a congressman who was elected and sent there by the people to like stay in his office. That's kind of like cool and like frugal. But if you're just the son of a congressman and now you got your own room in the Capitol building and it's actually a storage unit, it's just weird. And this is a little piece from the congressman's interview with the lawyer. So they say, how long did your son spend with you sleeping in your office overnight? How many days approximately? I don't remember, of course. They say, well, did your son ever stay there while you and your wife were both staying there, right? So like your wife comes to DC with you, you claim you sleep in your office. So I guess your wife sleeps in your office, but now you're saying that your son also slept in the office. Is that true? And they kind of back him into a corner. But he says, well, yeah. And they say, so where did he sleep when you and your wife were also staying there? Congressman says, I think he slept on the couch. The lawyer says, okay, well then where did you and your wife sleep? Congressman says, okay, you're kind of getting personal. I don't really want to go into that. I'll just say in the office. And it's like, all right, this lady's not asking you like in your home, where does your wife sleep, or like how many nights a week do you share a bed with your wife? Like she's just trying to get the logistics of this. You're claiming your son stayed with you in the office, but you're also claiming you slept there and your wife slept there. So she's just kind of saying like, how did that happen? You could very easily say, oh, I had an air mattress, my son slept on a couch, or we have a pull-out couch that we always use. My son brought, a camping pad and crashed on the floor. It was kind of tight quarters, but we made it work. You could answer, if that was the honest truth, it feels like you could answer a little bit more clearly. But, the congressman just retreats into defensiveness. Like, how dare you ask where my wife slept? It's like, all right, just seems a little bit suspicious. So, the summary is, of the witnesses, you got one witness who's like media trained. She's the communications director. She's not given anything. She's like combative with the lawyers. Like, I already answered that question. They ask a question. Oh, I don't know. I don't recall. That's one of them. One of them's like caught in the middle. She's like, I like working here. Sometimes I do favors for his wife. I don't really mind. It's fine. Then you got this pastor guy who's like, I have a very, very professional relationship. It's all professional. And then like half a page later, they're like, when's the last time you saw the congresswoman? He's like, oh, I was, they come over to my house for Super Bowl parties. And also, we have a prayer night every week. It's like, dude, keep your story straight. Like, you can be friends with your boss, but like now it seems like you're kind of trying to hide something when you say you're professional and now you're like seeing him all the time. It's kind of weird. And then you got this guy who was the boss in the Colorado Springs office. That dude's no nonsense. He's like, I'm from the military. Everyone who's in the military who was in that office quit as soon as they could because that office was toxic. Not how you should run an office. I had to get out of there. I had to fire, I helped fire this guy who's suing. I feel bad about it. I was worried for my job. And it's just kind of a picture of like, I like this because it's like, I probably disagree so much with that guy's politics, who's in charge of the Colorado Springs office, right? Because he's like former military, very Christian. I looked at his Twitter, very like conservative Republican, but I respect the fact that he's like, this congressman's just not running a good office. He's like blurring all the lines all over the place. We're doing personal things for him. We're doing campaign work and we're supposed to be working for the people. I respected that guy's deposition the most. I thought it was interesting to get a window into how these kind of things work. And I actually don't think there's going to be any consequences from this, to be totally honest with you. Like, the congressman's going to claim it's just like a disgruntled employee. If the Democrats try to, the Democrats run the House, if they try to like sanction him for ethics violations, he'll just say it's a partisan witch hunt. He's in Colorado Springs. He's been there for 15 years. There's no way he's getting like voted out on this. But yeah, the one narrow, he's not going to jail or anything like that either. Like, it's not at that level. These ethics violations are kind of like wishy-washy. At least I think. I could be wrong about that. There's a very thin crack there that maybe somebody will run in the primary and say, I'm a conservative Christian Republican from Colorado Springs, but this dude like can't even keep his office together. Listen to all these military men who are saying how his office was like a nightmare to work in. That's the one thing he could be in trouble if he just like ruins his reputation in Colorado Springs. But I highly doubt it. I think it's going to work the other way. The people who are suing him and the people who are being honest about what his office was like, probably their careers in Republican politics in Colorado Springs are either going to be like over or curtailed. That's the sad truth of it. And, the truth is this can happen on either side. There's been plenty of examples of Democrats over the years with ethics violations. If you read through the depositions, they got all kinds of similar stuff. There's a sense of entitlement that comes with being an elected official. You're like, I should be picked up from the airport and people should come over. They start blurring these lines and it's sad. And that's why when you see someone, and I don't think it's everywhere, I really don't. I think it's a small minority of people in these offices. I think a lot of Congress people do their best to abide by these ethics rules. That's why the ethics rules exist. That's why the Congressional Office of Ethics exists. And it's cool that we get to read these public accountings when these kind of things do happen. And, at the very least, I think the lawsuit's going to be successful just based on the depositions I read. It seems like there's corroborating evidence that this guy who was fired unfairly. And he just didn't want to, go along with this workplace that seems kind of toxic. So that's what happened. I thought it was pretty interesting. Hope you did too. Leave a comment. Let me know what you thought.